Welcome to my talk, Baselining for Bad Things with Surveyor. A little bit about me. I am located in Colorado. Of course, I'm here, but I'm also based in Boulder. I started my career as an IT in the Navy. Shortly after my time in the service, I became a government contractor working as a security analyst, and I now focus on adversary techniques, automation, anomaly detection of note to enhance our threat detection at Red Canary. I don't know if you guys had the chance to see, but these slides are available online. So I will pivot back. You can go ahead and find the slides online if anybody wants to capture those right now, but I will continue forward. All right. So today I want to talk about the importance of inventory and baselining, and I will show an example of how you can use our tool Surveyor to help do that in your customer environments or in your environment as well. So simply put, if you don't know what you have, you can't prioritize what you haven't inventoried. So a lot of times, big picture insights help assess trends, adoption rates, and risk at scale. To achieve this, security teams often need to answer very fundamental questions to help identify patterns in their environment, like who is using PSExec and how are they using PSExec? Who's running network sniffing and network scanning software, and why, and when. So if there's a set time interval that you expect to be running network scanning software, such as every Saturday from 7 to 9 a.m., that might be something that you want to be aware of. Also, what remote access tools are in use in our environment? We know that RMMs have been recently abused. They're not recently, but they are often abused in customer threats. So one of my illustrative examples today is going to be how you can use Surveyor to baseline your environment for remote monitoring and management tools. All right. So remote monitoring and management tools, very handy tools. They help us to streamline IT management tasks like applying updates, managing assets, and deploying software. And they are abused because, well, they're easy to install. They provide full access to a user's computer, and they're pretty much perfect for initial access. If I can have a user download an RMM to their device, and they're going to just grant me the access to their computer, I don't have to go through all the hurdles of trying to find a different vulnerability if they're just going to let me right on in. And looking for remote monitoring and management tools is a common thing that we mentioned in our threat detection report year over year, and I'm sure it'll be mentioned in the one coming up here soon. All right. So Storm 1811, a financially motivated threat actor who is known for socially engineering their way into their environments. They often impersonate as trusted IT, and then they gain initial access through RMMs like AnyDesk, Microsoft Quick Assist, and TeamViewer. Now, none of these tools are inherently malicious, but they pose a risk in your environment. And one way that you could detect these things is having a baseline of these tools in the environment. So if you do not use TeamViewer and you all of a sudden see TeamViewer in process telemetry, that's a good detection opportunity. So how Storm 1811 typically works is that they will flood a victim's email. They will then pose as IT and say, hey, I can help solve all these problems. Just let me get remote access to your device. Very simple. And what they will do from this point forward, what we have recently seen is that they will deploy Cobalt Strike, and create SSH backdoors. And in the worst case scenario, they find administrative credentials. They go ahead and move laterally throughout an environment, form data exfil, and then deploy ransomware. So one example threat that I have here is from one of our customer environments last month, where we see that a user was tricked to download or to give remote access to a TA. And it's apparently Quick Assist didn't work in this instance. So they said, okay, that's fine, no problem. We'll deploy another one. So they deployed AnyDesk and said, okay, I'll get access that way. And after AnyDesk was found on the endpoint. Additional malicious activity was identified, and that's why we classified this as ransomware in totality. So some things that we know. We know that TAs leverage RMM tools for initial access. Check. Common RMM tools are being abused. AnyDesk, TeamViewer, UltraViewer, ConnectWise. These tools are detectable in process telemetry. Judging by the threat here, you can easily see that we were able to detect these tools in process telemetry. But effective detection starts with understanding which tools are in our environment, and that is where our open source tool Surveyor, which is available now, can help. So what is Surveyor? Surveyor is simply a Python tool that queries EDR platforms and summarizes those results. So security and IT teams can baseline their environments to confirm expected activity, identify anomalies, gain insights into applications, users, and their usage. And currently the supported EDR platforms are Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Cortex XDR, SentinelOne, and VMware Carbon Black Cloud Enterprise EDR. All right. Within Surveyor, there are a lot of ways to query an EDR platform. And the one thing that I do love about Surveyor is that you don't have to be an EDR aficionado. So if you are not constantly in the EDR console itself and you're not familiar with the syntax, you can build straightforward detection rules by using, one, definition files, which are JSON formatted search criteria. You have multiple built-in, pre-built ones that are available within our repo, where you can look for things like remote administration tools, which I'll be showing a bit later. You can look for common scripting in your environment and baseline that activity. You can also look for network scanners, sniffers, file sharing, and backup tools in your environment. You can also build your own. So I want to show to the right, we have an example where we're saying we want to look for AnyDesk. What are the ways that we can identify AnyDesk? Well, one way is looking directly for the process name, anydesk.exe. That's pretty easy. That's also modifiable, so we'll talk about that a bit later. You can also look for any network connections to anydesk.com, right? And then the last option that we have here, or the last example that I have here, is how can we identify NetSupportManager? Well, if anybody in the audience knows, this is a Carbon Black query. So what we're saying is how we can identify NetSupportManager is by looking for the process name of client32.exe and the internal process name of client32. Or we could identify any network connections going to geo.netsupportsoftware.com. And how these definition files are structured, you can see that we are providing a process name and we're encapsulating that within an array. So if there are multiple process names that we are using to detect AnyDesk, it will just build out OR logic. So how the last query works, where we're saying process name client32.exe and internal name client32.exe, we have also the domain. So this is in an array, 2 strings, and we're saying build OR logic for this. So process name client32 and internal name client32, or network connection to netsupportsoftware.com. All right. In addition, definition files are custom made, right? They are custom rule logic. But what's more familiar to a lot of us here are Sigma rules, which are EDR agnostic queries for cross-platform searches. And the example that I have here is a Sigma rule from Adam Swan, where we're looking for potential password exposure via the command line. And how you could do this is say, with a common word editor, if I see password, secret, accounts, details in the command line that may be indicative of bulk passwords in bulk existing on disk, potentially unencrypted, that a user has stored, which is presenting risk in our environments. And the Sigma support available within Surveyor will easily translate this over to a valid EDR query, which you can see to the right here. All right. Lastly, we have the option to run batch searches and ad hoc queries. So if you are subscribing to, let's say, Malware Bazaar, updates their SHA-256 hash dumps every 5 minutes, and you pull from that and want to search for those hashes in your environment, you can easily use the IOC file parameter within Surveyor and say, just scan my environment for these SHA-256 dumps, any MD5 hashes, any IP addresses, any domains, especially when new articles come out. So I can say, just run this search. I don't have to go into my EDR. I don't have to be perfect with my EDR syntax. It makes life simple. Additionally, if you were to try to baseline activity for something simple such as PowerShell, making external network connections, you can do this by saying Surveyor, using the query parameter, and make a query such as process name is Python and netcon count 1 to many. All right. So getting into the actual part of detection, how do you detect RMMs in an environment? Well, we can use the remote admin definition file. So a few ways to detect RMMs, which I have shown a bit previously, are by looking for common network connections, digital signers, internal process names, and also process names. So if we know that TeamViewer is permitted in our environment, we also see it running from an expected location such that we deployed it via GPO. We know it's running from program files, for instance. Okay, check. That's fine in this case. But if we see AnyDesk, that is unpermitted because the only thing we have permitted is TeamViewer, and we see that binary renamed to something like a.exe, but the internal name is still remaining the same, such as AnyDesk. Well, that raises eyebrows, right? It's already suspicious that AnyDesk is existing in our environment because it's not permitted, but the fact that somebody went to the lengths of changing the binary name, that makes, I would say that this is a malicious activity, okay? So with this remote admin definition file, we have, over the last few years, added the common tools that you would see abused by threat actors. And what we can do with this is say, simply point with Surveyor and run these tools across our environment, looking for identification of them. Now, one thing to note, this file isn't all conclusive. So I do want to give a shout out to Magic Sword's open source project of LOL RMM, or Living Off the Land, Remote Monitoring and Management, which has a horde of Sigma rules that you can use to scan your environment as well. All right. So getting started with Surveyor is very, very simple. Simply clone the repo, create a virtual environment. I recommend doing this because if you are developing in an environment, it's best practice to not conflict with system dependencies. But following that, install the requirements and run the setup file. Very simple. All right, running Surveyor, also simple. So we say, Surveyor, I have these things that I want to look for in this remote admin definition file. I'm going to point to this definition file. I'm going to say, over the last 7 days, hey, can you tell me about the prevalence of all of these RMM tools in our environment, if they exist or if they don't exist? And in this example, I'm saying, just give me the last 5. I don't need to know every occurrence. I just need to know if it exists or not. That's it. I'm saying I want to run against my query against Sentinel-1's EDR, and then I'm going to provide those credentials in a configuration file. And the output here is that you can see, well, this is a bit scary, but there are many RMM tools in an environment, in this environment, for example. So we have AnyDesk, we have UltraVNC, TeamViewer, LogMeIn, Zoho Assist, Splashtop, and Dameware. Not necessarily malicious, right? But it is a cause for concern because it's increasing our attack surface. It is making us potentially, it's presenting risk in our environment. There are too many RMM tools, and likely they're not being tracked. All right. So the command line output is helpful. It's nice to see something highlighted in green. But what's actually useful when it comes to investigation is, okay, where are these tools installed? So The CSV output is going to give you the endpoint, the username, the initiating process path, very important, and also any command line arguments. And using that remote admin definition file, you can see that we had specified what we're looking for, the search criteria for that, and the program is going to be mirrored in the result as well. So if you were to take this CSV and upload it to your SIM, whether that be Elastic, OpenSearch, or Splunk, it makes aggregating on these results pretty easy and allows you to perform some sort of detection. So taking it a step further, how could you visualize the results? In this example, I'm going to use OpenSearch. So we're saying, okay, a controlled environment we know will have few legitimate RMM tools, making it a bit easier for outliers to be identified. But let's just take what we have, right? So we have AnyViewer. We see that AnyViewer is installed across 517 endpoints. There's a good chance that this was deployed by an admin, that they're tracking that. We see that RDP is in use. I'm like, okay, it's not as prevalent as AnyViewer, but they might be aware of that. Going a bit lower into the list, we see AnyDesk, we see Ninja RMM, we see Quick Assist. And Quick Assist, in this example, we don't see it on one endpoint. That's an anomaly, that's rare, right? And we know that Quick Assist is legitimate binary, but recent TA abuse does warrant further investigation. And Surveyor makes us faster at asking and answering those questions such as, well, were there any outbound network connections? If so, where to? Was Quick Assist used instead of another permitted tool, such as AnyViewer in this case? If so, why was that? It allows us to ask those questions and to detect this prior to something more serious occurring within our environment. So Surveyor has been very useful for us internally. And one thing that we've done is to scale it up across our environment. We've actually moved it to the cloud. So what this allowed us to do is, instead of a bunch of our analysts, our hunters, our researchers, having Surveyor existing on a local endpoint and having a bunch of environments that we're querying, we're saying, let's store it in AWS, let's put it into a Lambda function, and let's just use a GUI front end to query this backend in AWS. And what this allows us to do is to automate queries for early stage analytics and threat detection, which is extremely important. So if there is something that we're theorizing as being good for threat detection, but it's not necessarily suitable for production detection coverage, we can easily use Surveyor to refine it over time. We can still build something to detect threats in our customers' environments. In addition, us putting it in the cloud allows us to streamline baselining by uploading those results to OpenSearch directly. So what you see here is the step function. So we're saying, from the GUI, here are the things that we want to query for. So whether that be a definition file, that remote admin definition file, whether that be a one-off query, whether that be a list of IOCs that we've pulled down, we're saying, take this query across multiple environments, run them in parallel, and then drop the results to OpenSearch for analysis. So it centralizes result collection, and we don't have to run the same query from different endpoints, and allows us to collaborate because we know what everybody else is running. That is the basis of my talk today, but my call to action is use Surveyor to baseline your environment, verify expected activity, and investigate any anomalies. Surveyor has been extremely important for us, and I think it has helped a lot of incident response teams to get in familiarity with their customers' environments when they are called to respond to an incident. So if there's something that I mentioned today that you think you could use Surveyor for, whether that be on the engineering side of the house or fully how it is, I recommend forking the tool, customizing it for your needs, but we've made it open source for a reason. So if there's something that you think should be added to the tool that could be useful for the rest of the community, I recommend contributing back to the tool using a pull request. Very simple. Lastly, if your environment is pretty hardened by your assessment, or your customer's environment is pretty hardened by your assessment, I recommend testing with atomic red team. So we have a bunch of atomic tests where you're able to drop a RMM to disk, which should create a file mod event. And then if you execute it, well, that's a process execution. Verify that you have the controls in place to, well, if you're preventing it, prevent it. But also, if you can't prevent it, detect it. And Surveyor is one way to do that. All right. Any questions for me? I'll take those now.
I'm curious about other possible ways to extend the tool. One thing I'm thinking about is the video conferencing software that has, share your desktop.
Yes.
And I think I have seen some indications of threat actors using that as well. That goes a little beyond process name and path.
Right.
To detect that use. Do you see that as a possibility? And would that be the kind of thing that you'd be possibly looking for as a contribution?
I would say yes, because the thing that we are doing with Surveyor is not simply detecting only malicious activity. You should know what video conferencing you're using within your environment, right? So knowing if Wireshark is in your environment, for example, a network scanning tool or network sniffing tool, or T-Shark is being used within your environment, is good information, especially in the context of an incident. So I would recommend that be something that you add to contribute to the project, because it's not something, we're not just saying only upload something that's malicious, right? That's not what we're doing with the project.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes.
Once again, great talk. I just had a quick question about if so far you've seen in the community anyone use it with like threat intel platforms, so like MISP or like OpenCTI to kind of see, check for IOCs in the environment, or I guess very quick checking if what we have actually cataloged, like in MISP, for example, and applying it that way.
I believe so. We've had a few customers state that they use it in that way. Internally, we also use it in that way. So we use Synapse. So when we have collected some threat intel, Surveyor is a good tool for us to search for those IOCs in our customers' environments. It's extremely quick. So I would say yes. Yes.
Well, yeah. When you do that, do you just like export whatever the threat intel is to like maybe like a CSV and then do that, or how is that?
But we put it in AWS so that you can call it via the Lambda function, right? So
yeah.
What makes it simple is, hey, let's just assume role for your AWS and point to the IOCs that you want to list. So we have them in a list. We're not in a text file, right? No longer we're in AWS, and we say just scan.
Okay.
Very simple.
Awesome.
And anything that is confirmed as malicious, that would just go into our production detection coverage, right? So.
Cool, thank you.
I'm just curious about your analytics. Do you have any machine learning baselines, like based on the usage? So if we use some of these tools, seeing any deviation, like mathematical deviation from a baseline, do you have that insight?
That is not embedded within the toolbar. Would you mean like looking for maybe leveraging something like a Z-score to identify
It's
outliers?
completely mathematics. So like,
yeah.
Here's the baseline of what it looks like when our admins are using these tools, and all of a sudden a threat actor comes in. There's just a little aberration, and it warrants further investigation.
No, so Surveyor will be a tool to help you collect that information, and then you would run those analytics with another tool, for example.
All right.
Right.
Cool.
All right. Let's give Trey a hand. Thanks,
Perfect.
Trey.